So this job never gets old. I've been a rabbi for almost 20 years now, more than 18 years in this community. And I stand here before you with less nerves than I had as a brand new rabbi, but no less awe, no less yirah. It is truly, truly a privilege, a zechut, to be your rabbi, to be one of your rabbis. And I don't take that for granted. I'm so grateful for you trusting me once again to be one of your guides as we move through not only this beautiful sacred day, but in the days ahead. And for those of you joining us on live stream, I feel you with us as well. If Judaism teaches us nothing else, it's that there is a oneness beyond space and time. And that oneness, especially on Yom Kippur, is felt beyond our differences, beyond our separation. As Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, may he rest in peace, would say, it is a day of atonement. It's also a day of at-one-ment. So wherever you are joining us from, we are one. So as a prayer leader rabbi, I have many lofty goals. I aim to create a space where we feel safe enough to look inside and do the work of tshuva. I aim to create a space where we can utter the prayers and the ancient prayers, but also to allow our hearts to find their own deepest expression. I try to sing in such a way that we can feel joy and strength and togetherness. And I try to create enough space for silence so that we can, each one of us, hear that still small voice and sense the divine presence among us. But as the speaking rabbi, I have one goal tonight, and that is to keep you awake. This summer, we buried my first cousin, Andrea. Andrea was 2 years older than me. She has 3 kids, all close in age to my own, and a beloved husband. I officiated at their wedding over 20 years ago, one of my first weddings as a rabbinical student. Eric was actually the one to sign on the ketubah. Andrea was a professional photographer in New York City, a devoted wife, an awesome mom, an amazing friend, a supportive cousin, and a lover of all things that I did that were Jewish, pop culture, and her home, New York City. And thankfully, she visited us at Beth Meyer every time we had a simcha. 4 years after her diagnosis of glioblastoma, which is an incurable form of brain cancer, she transitioned from this world to whatever is next on July 13th. And I loved Andrea, and I still do. Before we laid her to rest, I guided her immediate family in the ritual of kriya, tearing a black ribbon and placing it over our hearts. As many of you know, we tear this ribbon on the outside as a symbol of the tear that we feel on the inside. And those of you who have performed this ritual might remember that as we tear the ribbon, we also say a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, dayan ha'emet. Blessed are you, the true judge. But what do these words even mean? Here's what they meant for me. I wish I wasn't doing this. I'm heartbroken by this. I don't understand how this is happening. And yet, I have no choice but to accept this, to feel this, to know this, to remain awake through this. I'm sure many of us have had Baruch Dayan Ha'emet moments this past year. Maybe you have laid a loved one to rest. But as Jews, we don't only say this blessing before burying a loved one. This is a blessing we actually recite whenever we receive difficult news or acknowledge something tragic or painful. I've said this blessing more than a handful of times this past year as an American, when I learned that 1 million people had died from COVID. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. When I heard that 19 elementary children, school children, and 2 teachers were slaughtered in a school in Texas. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. When I learned that a gunman steeped in white supremacist ideology killed 10 innocent people in a Buffalo supermarket. Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Facing these sorts of losses, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by our grief, to become cynical, to want to numb out, to reach for escapes. Our phones, the refrigerator, online shopping, too many glasses of wine, you fill in the blank. All in an effort to spiritually fall asleep. But Maimonides, the great medieval rabbi, reminds us of our mandate at this time of year. Uru yeshenim mishnatchem. Arise from your slumber, you who are asleep. Jewish wisdom is very clear about how we proceed in a world filled with tragedies we cannot understand nor fully prevent. We remain awake. I like to think about it as the original form of being woke. At every moment when we feel the sting of loss or tragedy, we say a blessing, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. And in doing so, we recommit to remaining awake, to feeling the fullness of our sorrow and disbelief, to staying connected to the truth of our experience. Tomorrow afternoon, we will be reminded of this mandate when we read from the book of Jonah. The book of Jonah opens like other prophetic books of the Bible, but unlike most of the other prophetic books, what follows is not an account of the divine words that Jonah received, but instead a story about Jonah, who is very reluctant, even recalcitrant. At the opening of this story, God calls to Jonah to go to Nineveh, one of the biggest cities in the ancient Near East. It's a city rife with wickedness. Jonah is to warn the Ninevites that because of their sinfulness, they now face divine destruction. But rather than heed this call, Jonah flees in the opposite direction on a ship to Tarshish across the Mediterranean Sea. Not one to let a prophet pull a disappearing act, God sends a hurricane, Ian-sized hurricane storm, to threaten Jonah's ship. And it is a doozy. The crew, terrified out of their minds, start throwing all the cargo overboard. And each person on the ship is praying to their own God to no avail. Meanwhile, Jonah falls asleep in the ship's hold, oblivious to the clamor and uproar. It must have been a kind of willful obliviousness, for who could fall asleep through the tumult of a storm threatening to overturn a ship and a crew of sailors crying for their lives? Here's Jonah, the prophet of God, who instead of responding to the challenges he faces, runs from them and falls asleep. It's as if God is warning us through Jonah's experience. It is tempting to retreat to the lower deck of our lives and fall asleep when life gets painful, or we sense that there's something wrong, but we must resist and remain awake. But how? How do we keep our hearts open and alert when we're prone to being troubled and overwhelmed on the one hand, or numb on the other? The Jewish answer, in my opinion, is that we create time and space to feel, to be with the fullness of this human experience. And I couldn't possibly know what that ought to look like in your life, but I know what it looks like in mine. Lighting Shabbat candles every week, I take a couple of moments to feel the full impact of the week. In prayer, allowing my gratitude, hopes, and fears to ride on the melodies and ancient words of my people. Mikvah, immersing each month to reflect on myself, on my relationships, on my work, on my hopes for the month ahead. Psychotherapy, enough said. Running outdoors, feeling my feelings in motion, allowing my feet to rhythmically touch the earth and sweating out toxins. Yoga and gentle stretching, feeling my body move slowly through space, noticing the feelings that get stuck in my bones, in my tissues, in my heart. Meditation, allowing myself to simply sit in silence, to breathe with awareness, and to bear compassionate witness to the stirrings of my mind. And friends, making time to talk with and listen to dear ones who don't just want to catch up on superficialities, but instead help me see and feel what is difficult to hold. These are some of the ways I stay awake. Maybe you share some of these practices. Maybe you have others. Maybe this is the year you try to put more of these practices in place for yourself. But even if you're fairly certain you don't have any practices, you are here now. And being in shul together on Kol Nidre is above all a practice in staying awake. At least I hope it is. And there are more opportunities coming tomorrow. Choosing to stay in the room for Yisker and for our Shoah speaker is courageous. These are all sacred practices in staying awake. We cannot repair what we cannot see, and we can't heal what we can't feel. Tomorrow night, when Yom Kippur draws to a close, there will be one final Tikiyah Gedolah, one final piercing blast of the shofar. And the sound of the shofar is many things, but among them, it's a spiritual alarm clock. It's that sound that pleads with us, wake up. Don't fall asleep at the wheel of your life. Don't be afraid to feel your feelings, all of them. Don't harden your heart to the cries of the world, the cries of the planet, the cries of the most vulnerable among us. Awaken to what needs to change in your life, and awaken even and especially to the Baruch Dayan Ha'emet moments that life delivers to all of us, those painful but unavoidable moments of truth. When we took turns shoveling dirt over Andrea's grave on that incredibly hot New Jersey afternoon this summer, and I watched her youngest son, only 8 years old, pick up the shovel, I wanted to close my eyes and fall asleep. I wanted to be anywhere else but there. But when I led the family in saying Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, that blessing was for me too. It was a reminder that my job is to be awake and fully present in my life. Yom Kippur is our yearly reminder that our time on this earth is limited. As my wise and beloved yoga teacher Jill Sockman often says, Why are we here? To wake up. How long do we have? Not long. Yom Kippur invites us into myriad rituals intended to wake us up to the fact that none of us, not a single one of us, will make it out alive. As we chant in Hallel from Psalms, Lo hametim yahallelujah, the dead cannot praise God, but we can. So the psalm continues, don't wait. Don't fall asleep now while you're still alive. May God give us all strength in the day ahead and the year ahead as we persevere in staying on the main deck of our lives, remaining awake to all that is here for us to learn and to know, to feel, to explore. May the sound of the shofar reverberate inside of each one of us, urging us to keep our eyes open and our hearts awake. Gamar Chatima Tova.